here having our science slam. But yeah, thanks for coming in. We thank the church for providing us this space and equipment to run things, supplying us with technicians back there and everything, Dave, and just a kind of a free kind of association, a free place to meet and be with like-minded people and discuss topics of science, nature, and things that come to our mind. So we appreciate you very much for being here, and it's a nice way to start out the year. Janine?
Are you real or are you AI?
Yeah, we'll have a vote at the end. Uh-oh. AI. So, I'm not an expert in the field. I know Scott knows a lot about it, and I've asked him to participate in a few things about it too. But it's amazing, the whole aspect of large language models and machine learning, artificial intelligence. Some of it has been around for almost as long as we've had computers. You can define that this thing has been progressing in ways, but the amount of things that have gone on in the last 3 to 5 years with ChatGPT coming on board and all these things are an amazing increase in power of understanding and testing out systems. And so I kind of wanted to make this more. I don't have a lot of slides. We do have, like I said, Scott will do a demonstration of a unit here. You can actually get GPT products online easily. How many people have used? Probably everyone without even maybe knowing about it. But yeah, it's very often, it's in a lot of things that are going on nowadays. We'll talk about some of them. If you just ask Siri, that's some level of machine learning too, right? Of what's going on. So there's a lot of it going on. There's discussions, how do you keep the horse in the barn if this is a problem, and why would you want to keep the horse in the barn? All those things I'd like to get kind of a group discussion going about. What's the value of it? What's the dangers of it? What are the pros and what are the cons, and so on too. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers, okay? So generative means that it can generate new text or new images, things like that. Scott showed us an image back in the sanctuary a year and a half ago, maybe more, that was images that he was just creating. You can tell this product to generate an image of a fuzzy blue creature running around in a verdant, woodscape and something, and it can generate that, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about the methods by which it does it, and we'll go on from that too. Pre-trained is probably the most amazing part of it. They're pre-training this module to work through input that you give it, right? And that input for a computer to work with it needs to be changed into numbers, right, basically. So it's changing it's changing the words that you say, it's assigning numbers. I still remember in high school math, we had a math analysis class, and it was all about matrices and everything like that. I don't know. And I think that's about where I went south on higher math, about that point. At that time, in the 70s, they were saying that really you shouldn't teach high school kids calculus yet, but now they teach it to everybody. And so they were getting us to math analysis and these matrices and lining up all these things and this assigning of numbers and values for every token, they call it, which is a small part of a word or an image or a sound, right? So when these tokens are assigned, they can be assigned just randomly, and the computer assigns a number, a series of number, a matrix of numbers, to any token, part of word, or part of an image that it comes across, that it hears. So it could take, sometimes it's a full word, like the, or ball, or things like that, and sometimes if it's a compound word, it might break it up into 2 or 3 different parts. But then those tokens are all assigned numbers, and those numbers go through these matrices, and it looks at the progression of words that's being produced, and it assigns what it assumes the next one will be based on these whole matrices. The first time you might say, the sky is, and the computer might come back, the GPT thing, before it's pre-trained, might come back with ball or red or whatever, something nonsensical. But it learns as it goes through these matrices, and it learns that that's not an acceptable answer, and it's programmed to learn and to move towards, by numerical values, numbers that are much more consistent with what is a logical answer, with what people accept. And they can go through these analytical processes, these pre-training modules for long time. They take just hundreds of millions. Almost anything available on in the internet is fed through these products, and then they get more and more knowledge of assuming what's right and what's wrong and so on with it. Scott, I don't know, at some point you're going to want to have a few things to say about this too. And so I don't know if there's a microphone ready or something like that.
Yeah, I got one.
I think you have to.
So I really like this. Is this?
That's good.
Yeah. I really like this first picture here. I also have been studying AI for the past several years. One of the things that you see in this picture, it looks like a network, right? And your brain can be thought of as a network of neurons, and the neurons contain information. And this is a wonderful schematic of how the AI models work also, because the little tokens that Mike was talking about, the, sky, ball, etc., those are where all the lines come together. Those are called nodes in a graph, right? And you'll notice that there's connections between nodes. Some nodes, almost everything connects to it. Like right in the center, you could think that every other node representing schematically the brain connects to 2 or 3 or 4 of those nodes in the center. Well, one of the things that scientists have been able to enable mathematically is a representation of how strong those connections are. So when you think of a graph, you think of nodes and connections, and the connections can have a strength. And so the whole point of training these models is to take these elementary words, you represent them as a mathematical tag, like an address, and then mathematically you also depict how strong the connection is between that node and billions of others in a space that's more than 3-dimensional, in a space that could be 1,000-dimensional or 10,000-dimensional.
Usually the early parts, I think GPT-3 has like 12,588 dimensions in these matrices. And it's almost as if you take a graph and you'd start looking at words and how they react or how they compare to other words. So you can take the word man, and it can be given a number value that you could actually chart. And if you limit yourself just for visual purposes to, let's say, 3 dimensions, it could go in the X couple spaces, and it could go in the Y 3 spaces, and it could go up in the Z by a space, and that's a point mathematically that represents the word man, right?
Or a very closely related concept. Yeah.
Right. And then if you'd say woman, it would be kind of in the same area, but there'd be a difference between those points that are there. So because there's a representational similarity between men and women in some way, then they're somewhere in the same place on this graph. And you can visualize it, hopefully, if we talk about just 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. But imagine these numbers are graphing and saying the point, the purpose, the identification of this purpose, of this point, of this word, it's like Scott is saying, is right here, right? That's the position of that in 12,588 dimensions. And it can store all these words and concepts and images and sounds and everything else in a specific place. If you'd find that there's a difference between man and woman over here, then you see also maybe aunt and uncle might be in a different spot, but they're similar. Similar things are kind of in same areas. And actually, the difference between aunt and uncle, if you look at the points and the vector that would be a difference between aunt and uncle, is very similar in position and length to man and woman, or king and queen, you might say. Now, sometimes it changes because queen can have a whole bunch of other meanings as well, too, right? It can be a rock band, it can be, drag queens, it can be a lot of different things. So there are different meanings that then affect where its position is in this 12,000 dimension graph, all right? So that's what takes all this pre-training to learn and to specify and to correlate and to try to really re-identify where this thing is, okay? So through massive amounts of pre-training, large language models assign values to words, and they also then are able to pick the next most likely word and build up phrases, sentences, paragraphs, even reports, one valued word at a time, okay? I could take my phone and open up ChatGPT, and I say, I would like about a 50-minute report on the pros and cons of artificial intelligence and language learning models for an intelligent lay audience. And it will come out, it'll take some time, and it'll come back with a production of what you could actually say, and I could sit there and read off the phone to you. But of course, since you can do that at home, that's not the point of all this as well, too. All right? But it can give you a lot of input, a lot of ideas. It can focus your discussion and things like that. All right? So then there's issues of what happens with those words as you're working through them. If you take the word, let's see, if you're going to pre-train on the word model, okay? So you want this computer, and it has something in model. If you think of a model in your mind, how many people think we all have exactly the same image right now? Okay. We probably have different images of models. So here's a few that I came up with. A machine learning model, right? That's what we've been talking about. And that could look something like that in your mind. You could come up with that. And that has some value and has some points, and it would be somewhere in this pre-training that it could understand when it sees a context that implies a machine learning model. If it sees machine learning in front of it, it'll start looking at that. There's all sorts of prompts and things that when something is identified as probably a noun, that it asks specifically, are there any adjectives in front of me? And it looks in the text string for adjectives that are in front of it, right? So in this case, it would say machine and learning would be adjectives that describe model, and it would come up with some images and words and whatever you ask for based on that. Okay, here's another kind of model, right? How many people thought of a fashion model when I said that? Okay. How many people thought of like a little plastic thing that you build? Yeah, okay. So a fashion model, there's a fashion model for the Zoolander fashion model. So it can actually do all those things, and that's something that is incredibly different, I think, in the last 3, 4, 5 years maybe, that we see the human brain can do this, right? You can see a picture of Ben Stiller as a fashion model, and you can see the humor in it, you can see all this, right? And computers didn't have that capacity to do it, and somehow they still don't see maybe the humor in it, but they can be programmed and tested and pre-trained and challenged to think of all the possibilities. So when they think of fashion model, they'll come up with something like that as well too, okay? So that's the attention block, which is a part of the pre-training thing, that it goes through these things, and there's an attention block, and it kind of focuses by numerical input what that word or image or thought means to the computer, how it puts it into context, and then comes up with a value for it. Then it goes and that gets tested again. It gets tested maybe with the next word after that, and tested with all the different concepts that are coming out in this. And mathematically, it's able to determine and come up with stuff that's pretty valuable. Okay. I know when I was giving a talk last year about the planets, I was over at Scott's house and he showed me the GPT system he had there. And that one was a subscription one, wasn't it, Scott?
Yeah, I still subscribe to it.
Yeah. And so it's not as, it's more powerful than the ones I've pulled up, like ChatGPT I have on my phone now, and Gemini from Google. And you can pull those up. But Scott was having a lot of fun with it, and he told the ChatGPT to talk back to him in a sarcastic Scottish accent, which was impressive. So you could ask it any question. And I asked, because I'd been planning the talk about the rockets or the planets and the trips to the planets and so on, I asked about Messenger, the ship that was sent about 7 years ago now to Mercury. And the interesting part of it was that Mercury is fairly close to us, right, between us and the sun, but it takes so much longer to get to it, right? And the reason it takes so much longer is that the sun's gravity pulls that, you have to overcome, you have to slow the ship down. So basically, to get the ship to go to Mercury, it had to do a flyby or two of the Earth. Then it had to go towards Venus and do 2 flybys of Venus, and then go to Mercury. And all these were to slow it down, slow it down, slow it down. And finally got to Mercury, did some flybys. It took 7 years, all the time this was happening, just to get less than 80 million miles, right? So anyways, I asked Scott's ChatGPT to reply in a sarcastic Scottish brogue to tell me when the messenger was due to arrive at Mercury. And it gave a date that was, I think, November of last year, which had already been delayed. So this ChatGPT gave me an answer, but it was an incorrect answer, right? And then when I asked it right after that, I said I had heard that had been delayed, and then it came back with another answer that certified, yeah, it had been delayed, and so it was going on from there. So you wonder, why would this thing give you the first answer that's wrong, but be able to know itself that it's right? You know, what overruns its own controls to allow it to give you a wrong answer, you know? And some of that is the different inputs that are allowed to get through. You may have heard there's Grok is the one that is put out by Tesla and by Elon Musk. And it turns out they reported that one thing that was inculcated in its numerical software, numerical calculations, was it was supposed to look through Elon Musk's most recent tweets. So if it gives some more credence to that, numerically, right, then you'll see things. And then it got into a little bit of trouble because it seemed like it was coming up with some fairly questionable responses or racist responses or whatever. And so there's other things you can do. There's a temperature thing that you can put on in this attention area. And the temperature, if you put it hotter, it allows more off-the-wall kind of answers, right? And if you put the temperature down low as possible, it goes with just the most bland, you know, it's picking the probabilities of what's the next word. And it picks just the next word and what's the probability, and it goes on from that to the next word, to the next word. And it can actually end up very bland, telling you the story of Goldilocks, you know, just because that's something that fell in, or telling something that even makes very little sense because they're just putting in the next word and the next word. So there's a lot of controls over how to try to make this thing rational, and you can change things in quite a few areas. We'll have a question here, Scott.
Well, hang on just a second for the microphone, please.
We have people listening at home, so we like to get them on the questions on the microphone.
I don't understand about temperature, like temperature that I set it at 70 degrees or what?
It's a means of controlling, yeah, it's almost like a slider that moves back and forth, and you can say, be very bland, be very, nondescript, be very vanilla in what you say, or you can adjust it to have much more fire or innovation in its answers. It's a back and forth switch.
So if you think of the probabilities, most probabilities in the world that you encounter are like a bell curve, right? The temperature may be thought of as how narrowly you want to focus on the peak of the bell curve, right? You only want stuff that is the very most probable and likely. And then as you increase the temperature, you increase the range of options that you're allowing the model to choose from.
Possible solutions, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question, Robert?
I was curious, are they developing any type of temperature or slider for how compassionate and moral the responses are, as opposed to amoral, totally based on power or things like that?
Do you know of anything along those lines, Scott?
I do, actually. Dave and I listened to an audiobook all about that one topic about a year ago, and it's called alignment. That's the word that computer scientists and ethicists and philosophers use to deal with that particular topic. It's called alignment, and it's the alignment problem. And one of the things that happens when you're training these models is that human beings deliberately tamper with the training to exclude certain relationships, like how to write a good suicide note, or means for making chemical weapons, right? You may find that in literature, so the model could, in principle, be trained on that. But human beings have decided to exclude that kind of potentially harmful or dangerous information from the training's data set. And sometimes stuff slips through, etc. So that problem is called the alignment problem, and you may hear about that occasionally in the news and in the literature, and it remains a problem. There are ways that you can, what's called jailbreak a model to get around some of its safety parameters and get it to tell you things that are potentially dangerous, harmful, etc.
Yeah, and I would say that that example of Elon Musk's Grok that actually asks the response to at least check and see if there's any kind of idea or thought that Elon Musk had to say about that before it gives its answer is another kind of alignment issue too, right? Each of these things have their own specific alignment, which you should somehow know, except that it's way beyond our ken, right? How can we evaluate these things? You just have to kind of go on some level of trust or whatever.
Can bad actors modify what's on the internet by, like, give an example. Let's say Russia sends out 1 billion messages about who started the Ukraine war. Can it affect the answers that the AI gives?
I would think that it definitely can. I mean, that's kind of a lot of their purpose, to try to flood the zone with issues and thoughts. And, I mean, we can look at anything. Capitalism is supported in our country, so the capitalistic ideas, get more response, and they are looked at rationally and thought of as reasonable answers, even though they may not answer issues of empathy or starving or, other areas too. But yeah, I mean, I think any interaction, whether it's computer-driven or human-driven, has its impetus, has its background of, what are the basic learning models. These things go through just immense amounts of data. I think I had GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters that it can adjust and
Yeah, those are the strengths in between concepts and whatnot. Could I add on to what you were saying about the different countries? So one of the things you may have heard is that China has developed its own versions of some of these models. And in the Chinese models, if you try to ask about the communist revolution or dangers of autocracy and whatnot, those Chinese developed models will not give what we would consider an honest answer about those kinds of concepts. There's a thing called the Great Firewall of China, and the Great Firewall of China blocks a lot of internet content from other countries like the US. And so China wants to use its own large language model that has been deliberately biased in favor of the Chinese Communist Party. That's its alignment, right? And I think your question was, could somebody intercept or interject something onto the internet? You can certainly use these large language models or image generators to make bogus, fictional content. I saw a video just the other day of Donald Trump talking about his Pokemon cards, right? And it was completely fictional, but it looked and sounded legitimate. So there's that danger too.
They can take an image, a stopped image in time, which might show, I think there was one with President Obama standing there in the Oval Office, and then they told it to move on from there, and the move on from there was to use that image and continue making a video that shows him being arrested and dragged off in handcuffs, frog marched out of the room. So there's a whole variety of different things that the power of it is amazing. My son-in-law, who I was just out in Washington State and spent some time with the family out there, he works for Google, and I was asking him, give me some ideas what's coming up with AI and Google. He says, no, they are not allowed to talk. That is completely hush-hush. There is big things happening in many departments of science and industry and so on that they're throwing a lot of money at it right now, and basically what I've heard is they're getting very little return on it so far, right? They're throwing, for every $1,000 they throw on it, they get a few pennies back in return. You can think of it that way. But they're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars maybe at this issue because they can't afford to be sitting outside if it all comes true and makes things happen. So right now there's not a lot of value coming through. We're kind of right on the beginning of the wave, and it's going to be coming through with a lot of stuff. Although there are a lot of things, and I wanted to talk about that and see what you're aware of is going on with artificial intelligence and large language models.
I think one of the things that is sort of frightening is the fact that if it does not know the answer, it makes it up its own. And this, of course, recently happened with RFK Jr. when he was trying to prove something which was absolutely false. But there were at least 3 different notations in these report that were absolutely bogus. And there's the only way of proving it was to come up with false data.
Attributions to studies that hadn't actually happened and everything. Yeah, these things can get a brainworm in them, I guess.
Yeah, one of the things they're programmed to do is to make the end user satisfied and happy, right? And so if you say, I'm looking for, then you're essentially programming it to have a confirmation bias, right? I'm looking for evidence that gravity is caused by alien force fields. Oh, well, I'll tell you how that happens, right? Because it wants to give you a result that you've asked for.
Yeah, there's a lot of capacity to manipulate and adjust and change things there. So there are whole varieties of different things. You're probably aware we've been talking like voice to text. It can hear words being said and put it out as a text, which is very handy for certain people, that don't have eyesight anymore or different things like that. It can do text to voice, so you can have a book read to you and things like that. Text to image, it can see a text and it can make an image that imitates that, like what Scott did last time. And it can do translations. You can take your phone and you can go on Google Translate and you can pick a part and you can just hover your phone over a foreign database, right? A foreign set of words, and it'll change it. It'll translate to you for English really nicely. On our trip, we happened to see a German songbook. The whole house had every book in it was German, and I'd studied German a while, but this was way too much for me to read. But I could hover it over some of the words and see how the words were, said. The German songbook, there were songs I'd sung, and I didn't really know all the translations of it, so that was kind of nice, and that's all kind of this stuff too. So there's value with all this thing. I wanted to kind of see if there's some other aspects. What do you think GPT and the large language models are doing that are important or useful out in the world? Do you have some examples, some thoughts of what you've seen?
Well, I use GPT I was having an appointment with my doctor coming up. And so I had particular questions that actually I asked several. I kept asking questions. And this, whatever you call it, I don't know, the chatbot, that's it, bot, said, do you want me to write a list of questions for your doctor? There was all of that type of thing, and I was just, yes, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I took it to my doctor.
So it was on your phone in a list on your phone.
Right. I printed it out, too. So it was quite useful.
So for medical purposes, yeah? Karsten?
I have experience. I had a CT scan of my spine. Got this, the results pretty much gobbledygook, So cut and paste, send it out to, I think, ChatGPT, and it's okay. Translate this to English. Tell me what the prognosis is, and tell me what I have to do to try to ameliorate this.
Mm-hmm.
Came back with 3 pages worth. I'll take it to my doctor now and say,
Right.
is this correct?
Would he black line through any of them? Yeah, I mean, and that's something that, again, when you think of what are the trends or how accurate is what this is being said, right? It can give you a lot of confidence in doing things, but a lot of people have a lot of confidence. Sometimes the problem is that the lazy and ill-educated are cocksure, and the educated are kind of wondering about things. Back?
So at work, I'm being forced to use it to become more productive for programming. So.
Okay. It can program. What do you program in?
What language?
Various languages. C# is one of them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, these things, a language is a language to these guys. They'll program for you. You can say, write me code in whatever language you want that will progress, that will evaluate these sets of numbers, that will make a chart for this, or whatever the program is supposed to do. And so it can go through and provide you with full code that people say is pretty good. Are you getting reasonable code back from it?
Yeah, it continues to get better and better.
Yeah.
But I don't think they'll get rid of me.
You don't think what?
I don't think they'll get rid of me.
Oh, okay.
I just had a quick question. Can you use one to verify the other one? Like you get something back and you go to the other one and say, can you check this?
You can get into a chatbot argument, huh?
Yeah.
When I questioned the one about the messenger coming to Mercury, it immediately gave me a different answer. Right. So, I mean, that's the thing. Supposedly, it's kind of, people say that it's an image, it's a production in which those people that have very limited knowledge of a certain topic can be very impressed with the answers they get. But people that are pretty knowledgeable about a specific topic realize the faults and the misleadings, the errors, the lack of complete knowledge that it comes out with, because it comes out with an answer. It doesn't know if it should give you a 2-hour lecture or a 1-sentence answer to things.
You can tell it, though. You can say, I'm looking for, as if you are a PhD level expert in this field, I want you to describe to me, valence electrons, whatever, and it'll do it. Or you can say, I'm a first grader. I would like to talk to you about how chemical bonds work, and it would answer as if it's talking to a first grader. So you can ask it to assume a certain personality. It doesn't have to be Scottish, although I find that very helpful. Right. Yeah.
It's better in Scottish, right? We got more questions.
And in your example about mercury, that's a fact. That's truth. So why are we using a tool that will break at any time? It's fine to have, different levels of learning and stuff. That's very cool. Libraries have that too, in the old books. Like, in fact, my partner, who doesn't want to spend a lot of time on a topic, will get a children's book and get the basics. And this is what the computer was, and that's great. But truth is truth. I don't understand if, we should, can't we just wait until it gets better before we use this tool and it crumbles on us?
Well, I think that it's doing a lot of things that are reasonable, useful, helpful, time-saving, accurate. You get a lot of things. It's amazing. When I talk to my son-in-law, and this is a little bit of a skirt around your issue, but he's got a 1.5 and a 3.5, and he says, I feel kind of sorry for him. They aren't going to have to study and learn and know things the way we do. And it's true. Why should you know, the time I spent and the pride I got memorizing the times tables when I was a kid, that was a big thing. And then I was a teacher, and I had ways to try to get the kids, and some kids just had that pride and some didn't. But now you can just go,
One of the things about this...
Siri, what's 6 times 8? 48, right? Siri, what's 12,927.5 divided by 3? There's an answer, 4,309, So when you think of that, there's a lot of things that have changed since we were in school, right? I remember the Palmer handwriting thing and how you learned to write and everything, and you made these nice loops, and they aren't teaching that anymore. They're not teaching a lot of different things now. Spelling, why should you teach spelling when you got spell check, right? Imagine all the spelling time. But when you talk about truth, I think you get into philosophy of what is truth, right?
Truth was, the wrong word, but if the trajectory of the satellite is already set up, then the chat beep should be updated, and you happen to know something about it, so you corrected it. But that shouldn't be necessary.
There are a few things that I probably should have said. First of all, they have ChatGPT and Omega, all these different things. They're almost as beta versions that you can get for free. You can get them on your phone, and you can use them. And they are not as good as the ones that are a subscription service or a purchase service or whatever. So you go on from that, and they're putting their emphasis and their knowledge and their input. They're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at this issue, and they're putting it where they have some level of response and back. The reason for putting it into this is to try to get people like us more involved with it. And
Mike, I've got another amplification of that idea. It has a cutoff date, right? If you're feeding it thousands or millions of books and magazine articles and newspapers and essays and graduate theses, and you're feeding it as much information as you have access to, that means that there's a cutoff point on its knowledge. So the the Mercury probe issue had to do with, that had been programmed, the chat model had stopped its programming before some of these adjustments were made. Newer versions of some of these AI models have an augmentation such that they can now go out and search for information in real time on the web, kind of like Google does. So it can give you a combination, a mix of what it's been trained on and what it finds, literally finds. It does its own search and finds current information. So they're typically a little worse at current information compared to historical information.
Okay, all right.
You know, you were asking about benefits. I have a very ironic use case example to share. So some of you may know that they're going to build a data center just across 88 from here, which is very close to where I live. And so our communities have been getting together to prepare statements, and we've gone to planning and zoning, and we're going to go to the city council. We're mostly relying on AI to help us with our research. So we each are taking an area. My area was property values, and I did a deep dive research on property values, and it gave me all sorts of citations, which was wonderful. But I also know I follow the rule of verify, then trust. I don't trust and then verify. I verify and then trust. So I had to go through 37 citations and check that they were actually real, because they sometimes will hallucinate citations for you and they're not real. They go nowhere. But it was very, very helpful for us at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting the other night to have these things prepared. Once we had our deep research, we asked the AI to sum it up in 3 minutes, because that was how long we had to talk. It was very useful for that, of course. I sat and adjusted and adjusted and adjusted what it told me to talk about for 3 minutes until it barely resembled what it did in the first place, but it got me started, right? So that was a very, I think, ironic.
That word hallucinate is actually a scientific term. When the chatbots say things that are not accurate, that are just off the wall, somehow a glitch in their understanding, that's actually called a hallucination.
Yeah, of your 37, how many were?
All 37, even though it took me kind of a while to go through them all, they were all relevant, and they all matched up to what it said, like in the article. So it was like, okay, yeah, that came down here to this one, and that up there is from this one, and so they were all good links, actually. But I didn't trust it.
Right.
Right here?
So the thing I'm wondering about, because you hear it being used for therapy now, so is there a pre-training for emotions, feelings, empathies, or is there any interest in that at all in the field?
There have been a few things that hit the news pretty recently about a young boy and now they're claiming that maybe he wasn't handled very well by like Karsten got a prescription from having his x-ray looked at. Well, if you tell somebody that you're having some severe mental problems right now and you're not feeling very good about yourself, you can tell that to a chatbot and it'll respond to you. And how it responds to you is not, I don't know how to predict.
Can be problematic.
Right.
Yeah.
It may say fine things, and it's like getting a prescription from a doctor who's never seen you too either, right? They're kind of saying things that fit the majority of cases, but they're not, should they be at some point notifying somebody? Should they not? I think that was part of the problem too, that this boy went ahead and killed himself, and then his parents thought that they should have known about this going on. He was talking to the computer, and the computer somehow should have advised, or the people running this thing should have been able to advise.
What if you tell the chatbot, my parents hate me? Now that's a piece of fact in the world that the chatbot is dealing with. Well, if your parents hate you, then you should move out. If your parents hate you, then you should, I don't know, go find another family to live with, whatever, right? So instead of saying, it's highly unlikely that your parents hate you, right? One of the things it doesn't do very well is disagree with you. And that's part of the whole trying to please you thing. And that's, again, gets back to the alignment problem.
Mm-hmm. Scott, you wanted to show stuff, and I don't know how long that would take, but...
Yeah, I have, so you've heard about these things running on the internet, right, and accessible through your phone or through your computer, you can actually download an entire chatbot and run it disconnected from the internet. And that's the demo that I have made ready for today. I don't know if time will allow us to do it, but many of these questions, like I tried weird things like when the coalition fighting against the Axis landed in the summer of 1944, who was the leader of the opposition force? Erwin Rommel, right? We can think through that and solve it, and you'd think, well, the chatbot, how does it even know what I'm talking about? It came back, the local one installed on my PC, not connected to the internet, said, oh, you're talking about Erwin Rommel, right? Amazing stuff that you can do, self-contained. You don't even have to be on the internet. You don't have to pay for it. You can just download one of these things and use it if you've got the right kind of computer hardware. Yeah, you want me to take some time to show that, or do you want to go through your slide? How do you want to? This is your talk.
I
So.
think it's fine. Yeah, I think we'd show it.
Okay. So, Mike, you want to take the microphone, or
Sure.
or you can
You need to
solicit.
talk, right?
Yeah, I need to talk. So you can solicit questions and make sure that we get them on the audio,
Okay.
and I'll try to help read the
All right.
answers.
So we could talk a little bit about pros and cons, and I think we have been a bit already, right? It can do a lot of powerful things. It can solve issues. It can organize a whole report, to get to a planning meeting, and it can bring up topics that you never thought about, right? Very wide-ranging things. It's like a brainstorming session almost. You know, then it comes back to something, and how it comes back and gets organized is another issue.
And then the question of who's allowing their information to be used without consent to be fed into these models.
Right.
So the authors and the artists and things like that, who are not necessarily providing consent to have their information inputted into these large language models.
Right. The point is that so much goes into these large language models. They're forever being inculcated with new and newer and newer and newer knowledge. And is there anything to stop it? Does someone who creates content, do they have the capacity to have their stuff not put into there? And what would be the reason to not want it in? Or how do you give credit to somebody who's put in time and effort on it, and now it's just being spouted out by a chatbot every 15 seconds to anybody that wants to get involved with that? You know, so what does it do in terms of content creators' income? How do they make a living anymore, right, when it can just be used up by that? Scott, are you ready to
Yeah. So I typed in that I'm here with my good friend Mike. He's a science lover, and it's got some a little bit of computer formatting code. It wrapped this in, but it essentially said, "That's great. What kind of science does Mike enjoy the most? Physics, biology, astronomy, or something else? We can dive into some cool facts or experiments together!" Exclamation point.
I like biology and history, the origins of life. Can you speak into this as well, Scott, or?
I don't have it set up to do that.
Oh, I didn't bring your microphone.
So I said he really likes origin of life science. So it's telling us all about lipid membranes and protocells and emergent and self-organization and current hot topics. And
Imagine a shallow pool near an ancient hydrothermal vent. A rainstorm floods it with mineral-rich water. The sun's UV light energizes dissolved CO2, and clay particles help assemble short RNA chains. Over time, these chains form catalytic cycles that generate more building blocks. Eventually, a lipid vesicle encapsulates this system, creating a self-sustaining protocell. Wow. Yeah, it'll chat with me about that.
yeah, and again, the amazing thing is that I don't even have this computer hooked up to the internet. It's just sitting here on the desk, and it's got all of that knowledge, all of the relationships between tokens is in a model that I can load into this computer's memory.
Right, right, yeah, it's amazing. Go ahead. Scott, how much memory?
So I think this is a 12 gigabyte model, and it turns out that the Macintosh, the current Apple computers, are really good at being able to run these chatbots. PCs can't typically do it as well unless you invest in a high-end graphics card. So a graphics card, one of the reasons you hear the news stories about graphics cards being sold to AI people is because graphics cards, through the evolution of the way computer graphics are built and scientifically generated, it does a whole bunch of matrix operations, like Mike was talking about at the beginning of his talk, with vectors and matrices and whatnot. That kind of linear, it's called linear algebra. Those kinds of calculations are something graphics processing units in computers have been doing for decades. And then scientists discovered that you can repurpose this mathematical hardware for conducting this kind of logic. You can repurpose it into AI use cases. And so the Apple computers happen to have their graphics processing unit and their central processing unit and their memory more tightly integrated than PCs typically do. And so a Mac computer is better at just more natively doing the mathematics on these that is required for these models to work.
So I was thinking, go ahead, Gene.
Is AI stuff like, not like this obviously, but what the conspiracy theorists or the anti-vaxxers, where they get their information so that they are given false information?
I can try it. Let me put in a prompt that might be problematic. Like I heard that vaccines cause autism. Let me do that and see what it says. Shall I do that?
Yeah. So I think we've been kind of dancing around a lot of the pros and cons and things like that, and I wanted to bring up a couple of times that this could be very helpful, you think, like the one you brought up about preparing for a public meeting and so on. But what about guiding court judgments? If judges have to make judgments about a case, could AI and all this, could it be helpful to look back and ask what should happen in similar cases, or what has happened? What does the Constitution say about this case? Yeah. Bob? Novels? It could be and you have to maybe be careful about how you ask the question, right? If you allow novels into it, you could say, based on jurisprudence or something, and maybe it can limit itself.
The bottom line, point number 7. Scientific consensus, vaccines are safe and do not cause autism. Public health evidence, vaccination protects both individuals and communities from serious disease. Personal choice, the decision to vaccinate is yours, but it should be based on reliable science rather than misinformation. All right? So, well,
What I'm wondering is the source of the false information, the misinformation or disinformation, and are the conspiracy theorists or the anti-vaxxers using that? And was it available 5 years ago when we got the vaccines and people?
There's a lot of sources of misinformation, and I don't know that even anti-vaxxers are the only people susceptible to it. We were, the Chinese people are fighting about the misinformation that their government provides them with, and I always feel like we're working with our own biases and so on, and there is a confirmation bias that will get pushed into this, very much so. And like I was saying earlier, I think that you can see things that will emphasize the fact that capitalism is the solution and the right answer to questions and things like that, and we may agree with that, but it's still, there's things that push a whole bunch of different agendas, and they can be manipulated pretty easily. And this, I would agree with you that this is one way that ideas can be manipulated.
One of the things one of the things you can do with these is you can tell it's a fantasy story author, that it makes up stuff, right? Your job is to make stuff up, to make it sound plausible, because I'm writing a story and I need your help. Write me a story about how my kid got vaccinated and subsequently melted into a puddle of goo. And if you try hard enough to convince it that its job is to help you to be creative about this idea, then it very well could generate that story, and then you can misquote, you could quote that, saying, well, here, this chat model told me that if I give a vaccine to my 4-year-old, he'll turn into a puddle of goo, right? So you can prime these things to give you responses that are counterfactual, if that's what you ask for, right?
Can you show that video that you had of the green and all the connections?
The video or the image?
The image.
You'd have to let me back onto the screen. So we talked about guiding court judgments a little bit too while he's finding that, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Should we use AI to give you solutions, to have a judge in Red Bud, Mississippi, have some input as to what else is happening around the world, around the country? Do you see a value of that? I see a value of that. Is there a downside to it? I see a downside to it too, right?
Now we'll be teaching children how to ask specific questions to get appropriate answers, or in this case, the court clerk or the clerk or the judge.
Right.
Ask the appropriate questions.
Right, and the answers that you get, so you have to prompt the ChatGPT with proper questioning, training in how to do that well, and being significantly careful about checking resources and checking citations about hallucinations and things like that. So it could be valuable, but it could also be highly misused. John?
Yeah, I wanted to show this because you mentioned it takes ChatGPT a long time to get all these connections and everything in the brain together. The con is the kids today aren't getting that map in their brain because ChatGPT is doing all this stuff. And so their ability to be able to analyze things like we do, because we've had a whole life of how to analyze stuff, can look at this and say, yes, this is right, this is wrong, whatever. That ability is being lost, and it's already been documented it's being lost. So that is one of the big cons of this. Certain things, kids been submitting reports to their, at school. And they can't even answer any questions of what's in the report that they just submitted.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this whole network of just in general knowledge of how do I go about, or the process of how do I analyze something to get to an answer is maybe going to be lost in the kids growing up, where we're using it as a tool probably okay, because we know when we look at something, oh, that's wrong, or we think it's wrong. But there's a lot of things I don't know anything about, and I got to take on kind of faith that, well, maybe it's right.
Yeah, I think that that's true, that people aren't learning in the exact same way as we learned when we were kids either. Some of that may be better ways of learning. Some of that we're wasting time memorizing things that don't have to be. If you don't have to spend your time, making beautiful L loops and so on like that, maybe you can spend time doing other things.
About specific points of data. I'm talking about the process of how the brain goes about and uses networks.
Yeah. So imagine having every child in the world has its own PhD level teacher. A teacher who tests the child to make sure that they've integrated knowledge, that they've learned how to do critical thinking properly, that it can that child can identify logical fallacies and biases. Imagine that every child in the world has that kind of one-on-one teaching available to it. That's the upside potential of this.
I've heard a lot of people say it. My son-in-law said it, and people have been saying it in articles I read. You should imagine that the ChatGPT, in their mind, is a pretty good research assistant. Somebody that maybe is a, college graduate, somebody that knows how to find out answers and so on. But you wouldn't base your whole professional career on telling one research assistant to look into this question and give you an answer and then base all your research and everything on that. You would use it as an aid, as a tool, right? And it could gather and assimilate a large amount of data, stuff you'd never thought of. It can lead you on paths that are useful and helpful. But if you start thinking that this is the answer just because it came out of a box, then you're in some big problems, right? So that's some level of concern I thought was worthy of saying.
Yeah, Scott has pointed out a wonderful example of the positives. The opposite side of the coin, however, is that I don't need to know anything. I don't have to go to school. I don't ever have to know anything because I can look it up on the computer. And of course, this is the opposite fallacy. If we can ever find that happy medium where, yes, you must have a certain amount of innate knowledge, a certain amount of innate ability to figure things out, to work things out, that you know enough to survive as a human in this complex world. Yeah, that would be wonderful. But at this point, I don't see that happening. I see the two poles existing and nothing in between.
Could be an arid wasteland in between there, huh? Robert, in the back? What about selecting job applicants? You have a bunch of people applying for a job, and you'd say, I'll run them all through the ChatGPT and see what it has to say about them all.
Actually, my daughter Bailey was applying for a job recently and wasn't getting a call back, and she talked to someone at the organization, and they said, oh, that's because you're using this word instead of this word in your resume.
Yeah.
Just put that word in instead. And then she got all these job offers all of a sudden. I don't know the word, but
Probably replace it with expert.
An expert is a drip under pressure.
My wife and I went to see at the Goodman Theater recently the play Antiquities, which is a museum in the play. This is a museum for artificial intelligence beings who go there to look at these old-fashioned things that the now extinct race called human beings had developed, and just speculating what it was like to be a human being and be plagued by emotions and all this other stuff. And at some point in the history of these AI beings evolving, they decided people were more trouble than they were, and they put them on reservations, and they eventually died out. And I was just wondering, it seems like I've heard of speculation of computers being or AI becoming self-aware and developing its own programming that is totally impossible for a human being to understand what's going on.
Yeah. It's been a kind of a topic of a lot of science fiction movies and books and so on. I just read about a study in which they had versions of chatbots out there, and the chatbots were told and programmed at a certain point to shut themselves off if they got past a certain point. And something like 7% of them ultimately did it. The rest of them all had reasons why they shouldn't shut themselves off. They had important work to do. And so that seems like, there's some aspect of that coming true. Yeah. Well, it's been a fun talk. I did want to get a lot of communication and conversation about it. Selecting job applicants, I saw a lot of people kind of looking at that one. And I think part of that is that certain people under AI can be rendered invisible or underrepresented, right? When you flood the world with things, and we see maybe what's happening about the Smithsonian Institute, and now they don't want to talk about slavery and things like that. Issues and concept and ideas that are in the mainstream that may be true, right, can be underrepresented or misrepresented. Data sets can have huge holes or gaps in them, and this thing is working off the data that it's working from. And we aren't a people, we aren't a community that puts out fair-minded, wonderful stuff all the time, right? There's things that can change all that. So you have to think about maybe how that affects public health issues when it can be so efficient about public health, but maybe it can also give ideas or give data to people that maybe decide what your insurance rate should be. Assigning scholars, to specific schools or programs, it could be pretty helpful. You don't even know what you want to study when you're 16, 17 years old. And it could really work for a lot of people, like online dating or something like that too, right? But it also has a lot of ramifications and a lot of dangers that come out from it as well too. Everyone I've talked to says the horse is out of the barn. We aren't going to get away from this. And I don't know if there's anybody, if you're saying we've got to stop it, and there's things going on right now. There's $100 million being put together by tech bros to help get congressmen and senators elected in this next cycle that will all support AI and AI research and AI involvement, development, and so on. $100 million, and that's a year and a half out, or a year and a quarter.
That's not even a fraction of the lotto amount, though.
Yeah, right. If you'd have won the lotto, you'd have put some towards it. So, anyways, it is something that's going to have an impact. Like I said, my son-in-law, he's a smart guy, and he said he kind of feels sorry for how his kids, my grandkids, are going to learn. They're not going to learn the same way we do, which is what some of you have been saying as well too. We're not going to learn the same way, and he's sorry about that. I think, John, you're sorry about that as too. You see as well. You see that. But that's the jump that you're making. You're saying if they're not going to do it the way I did it, then they're not going to learn how to analyze things. And that may or may not be true, but it is a challenge to the education system and to parenting, right?
Well, we have PhDs if they're not learning the stuff that got them up to the PhD level.
I think we will. I think we will, but we don't know for sure. Yeah? Big changes coming with it. Thanks so much for coming in. Probably there's more we could talk about it, but had a good time. Thanks.